Well, hi there, food friends. It's Kevin, and welcome to Cavalcade of Food. And today we have a little discussion about a cookbook. And normally, when I talk about cookbooks, I'm in the cookbook library. But today, I thought it would be appropriate to move the conversation to the kitchen because we have in the kitchen studio, with the help of Ralph and Todd, a 1954 Westinghouse electric range. And 1954 also was an important year for Westinghouse because that is the year that Westinghouse came out with a cookbook. And the cookbook was the Betty Furness Westinghouse Cookbook, prepared under the direction of Julia Kiene. Now, I don't have one of these with its original dust jacket. It's very hard to find these. They did have a dust jacket when they were first out, and I don't have one with it. However, the binding came in two different colors, sort of this yellow gold and this green. What the significance was is a bit of a mystery of why some were yellow and some were green. I have been told that one of the colors was these were books that were purchased in a bookstore because these were published by Simon & Schuster, pretty big publishing house, and they were available for sale at bookstores and places where books were sold, department stores and things like that. And then I was told another color was books that were given away complimentary by Westinghouse dealers. So, for example, if you bought a Westinghouse appliance, a stove, refrigerator, perhaps a Westinghouse TV, a major thing at Westinghouse, the dealer threw in a cookbook as a thank you gift. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But I do have a couple of copies in both the green and the yellow. But I want to talk about this book because, one, it was an incredibly popular book in 1954, due in large degree to Betty Furness. And it says the Betty Furness Westinghouse Cookbook. And then Julia Kiene is sort of actually the author of the book. So who was Betty Furness? Well, some of you raise your hand if you remember Betty Furness. So some of you may know who Betty Furness was. Betty Furness was actually an actress, and she was never a big actress. She was never a sort of a player, as it was, but she had small roles in movies, starting, I believe, in the 1930s and into the 1940s. And in 1948, this is at the very dawn of television, there was a TV program called Studio One, which put on basically dramatic performances. Think of it as a play almost that was on the television. And the sponsor of Studio One was Westinghouse. And there was an actress who was, or an actor, I'm not sure, who was supposed to do the commercial during the TV show for Westinghouse, and they couldn't do it for some reason. And so Betty Furness filled in. Well, when the folks at Westinghouse saw Betty Furness and what a great job she did, they liked it, and they wanted her to do more. And the next thing you know, she sort of became the Westinghouse official spokeswoman. And that was an arrangement that really started in 1948 and went all the way through 1960. So it was a job that she held for 12 years. After that, she continued acting. She had a daytime TV show, and then Lyndon Johnson, I think around 1967, President Johnson appointed Betty Furness to be a special assistant for consumer affairs and protection. So she actually got a government gig, and she became an advocate, consumer advocate officially for the U.S. government. And then from 1969 to about 1993, she served on the board of the Consumers Union. And perhaps you've heard of the Consumers Union because they're the ones who publish Consumer Reports, the very famous buying guide and consumer research institute. So Betty Furness was involved in that organization. But that's who Betty Furness was. How great of a cook she was, I don't know. Again, she didn't write this book, but Julia Kiene was responsible really for the contents of this book. And again, this book here, I'm looking, this is the first printing, copyright 1954 by Betty Furness and Julia Kiene. And it says, this book is dedicated to you, a busy homemaker who gladly prepares 3 meals a day for your family and who delights in doing it. I want to read the preface, which is written by Betty Furness, and it says, until I began doing Westinghouse product demonstrations on television in May 1949, I said 1948, so I guess I'm corrected, I never realized what a delight and a marvel of convenience a really modern kitchen could be. But through my work, I eventually, in my own magnificent Westinghouse kitchen, discovered what wonders could be performed. The whole process was so fascinating that I finally decided it would be a great idea to pass on what I had learned to you. I'm not the worst cook on my block, but I'm afraid I'm not the best either. I'm sure that's an understatement. I realized that it might be some time, more years than any of us would care to wait, before I had enough knowledge to write a whole book by myself. But I was lucky because in my acquaintance there was a charming lady who knew everything there was to know about the subject. Her name is Julia Kiene, and she's the director of the Westinghouse Home Economics Institute. Julia has made cooking both her profession and her hobby. I proposed my idea to Julia. She agreed to pool her experience and knowledge with my enthusiasm, and here is our cookbook. The recipes are written so they can be cooked on whatever type of range you may have in your kitchen. We hope that you have fun with it, and when your golden rice casserole or leg of lamb oriental turns out just right, remember, you can be sure if it's Westinghouse. So the famous tagline for Westinghouse, you can be sure if it's Westinghouse. So here's Betty Furness basically saying, my name's on this book, but really Julia wrote it. And so now we say, okay, we know who Betty Furness was. She was the face of Westinghouse. So who was Julia Kiene? Well, again, she was the director of the Westinghouse Home Economics Institute. And Julia Kiene was a woman who was a nutritionist and a home economist. And all of the major manufacturers of appliances, if they made ranges, had somebody like a Julia Kiene employed, who perhaps ran a test kitchen and tested out recipes and also helped guide in answering questions that consumers had about their particular appliances. So whenever you bought a Westinghouse appliance, So as an example, here's a couple of Westinghouse brochures. Here's one actually from 1954 for a Westinghouse refrigerator, and here's another one for a Westinghouse refrigerator. Not sure what year, 1950, so this is a little older. On the very front page, the first thing you get here is a message, that photograph that you see. This one is sort of in the oval, and this one's in the square. That lovely lady right there is Miss Julia Kiene, and she tells you basically how happy you're going to be with your Westinghouse appliance, and how you can feel free to write to her if you have any questions at the Westinghouse Home Economics Institute. And this was a time where there was no email, folks. Okay, we wrote on a piece of paper, put a stamp on it, and sent it away, and that's how we got questions answered. Seems archaic and antiquated now, but it actually really did work, and a lot of people did that. Anyway, so Julia Kiene talks about, you know, how great the refrigerator is and how it's going to just rock your world and change your life. Here is a Westinghouse electric range, 1945, and here is another electric range from 1941. So here's a couple pictures of Julia. You see, she's a little less matronly, although maybe just a little bit less in these photos, because she's obviously younger than when we get into the 50s. But Julia worked for the Westinghouse Corporation for a long time, and you know, anybody, again, who bought a Westinghouse appliance, even not necessarily just a stove or a refrigerator, but even a small appliance, like here's one for a Westinghouse electric roaster oven, and look right inside. There she is, Miss Julia Kiene. So she was very trusted, and it looks like the Westinghouse Home Economics Institute was in Mansfield, Ohio, a great city. Westinghouse had a big factory there where they made their major appliances, and Tappan actually was also in Mansfield, Ohio. It was quite a powerhouse of manufacturing at the time. So anyways, that's who Julia Kiene was. And so she and Betty Furness, and like I said, I think Betty Furness in name only, came out with this cookbook, which they printed actually into the 1960s. Here is a paperback version of the book, and it is just a reprint of the 1954 one, but it is still the Betty Furness Westinghouse Cookbook, and poor Julia doesn't even get her name on the front cover for this one, but she does get a mention on the inside. Julia Kiene, under whose direction this book was prepared, has advised several generations of American women on cooking and home economics. Director of the Westinghouse Home Economics Institute for 18 years, she is the author of several other cookbooks, including Sugar and Spice, Step-by-Step Cookbook, and the Electric Fryer Cookbook. So she does get her props in the paperback edition, which came out later. But this cookbook, again, has literally, I don't know how many recipes in it, probably over 1,000. And they are very, very simply written. Here's a closer look. I'm sitting a little far back, so I don't know. These are both first printing, both of these books from '54, and again, they are identical with the exception of the color of the cover. But I love this, that the illustrations are wonderful. I just love that. and very 1954, very mid-century, as all the young hipsters like to say these days. And the table of contents, first chapter is soups, meats, poultry and game, fish, vegetables, salads, fruits, fried foods, sauces, macaroni, spaghetti, noodles and rice, eggs, cheese, sandwiches and canapes, quick breads, yeast breads, dessert, pastry, cakes, cookies, candy, beverages, and then the index. So you can see it's fairly comprehensive, and it's, again, very straightforwardly written, and I love especially again, it sort of has these wonderful illustrations at the beginning of each chapter. And here, so this is poultry and game, and it says chicken, how to buy. The common classes of chicken are broiler, fryer, roaster, pullet, and hen, which is also sometimes called the stewing chicken. So this book was meant for the novice and those who were more experienced cooks, because it really did give a definition of terms, which in the beginning of this book, it actually has a little glossary called Some Cooking Terms. Beat, blend, fold, stir, baste, blanch, braise, caramelize, cream, etc. So it really goes down the list. So for those inexperienced cooks who might not know what fold means, that is explained here. And the thing too is, in 1954 you had young people just starting out, and perhaps they got themselves a new Westinghouse range or had any stove in their home where they were living or apartment, and here it showed them what to do. The front cover has this kind of an interesting, at first you look at it, it looks like a magnifying glass, but if you actually look at it, it's sort of three-dimensional, and it's actually a pot, and you're kind of looking down inside of the pot. There's the handle, and there's the inside of the utensil. It's an interesting illustration. But yeah, this is the Westinghouse Cookbook, and they sold a lot of these, and they gave a lot of them away too, I think. And if you had a Westinghouse Cookbook somewhere in your life, maybe you had one, maybe your mother, your grandmother, somebody in your family, you remember seeing one, whether it was green or gold color, let me know in the comments. I love hearing about your own cookbook journey and cookbook experience that you have, because cookbooks are one of the things we are really into over here at the Cavalcade. So anyways, the 1954 Westinghouse, Betty Furness Westinghouse Cookbook by Julia Kiene, to a perfect accompaniment to the 1954 Westinghouse giant oven range that is now taking its turn here in the studio kitchen at Cavalcade of Food. So as always, I thank you for spending some time with me for a look at a classic cookbook from the Cavalcade Cookbook Library. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. It helps us out a great deal. You can find other fun things on the website, which is cavalcadeoffood.com, if you want to go there. And please give the video a like if you are also a classic cookbook fan. And I will look forward to seeing you again real soon back here on Cavalcade of Food. Bye, everybody.